Welcome to Net Impact, the podcast that demystifies and explores the influence of cybersecurity and cybercrime across the world and into our lives. Brought to you by ThriveDX, the global leader in cybersecurity training. Here's your host and guide to the digital world, Fred Menachem.
I'm so happy to be back. I'm Fred Menachem. Of course, this is Net Impact, brought to you by ThriveDX, and I've got a great guest today. His name is Fred Karlinsky. Excited to have him. He is with Greenberg Traurig, and we'll tell you a little bit more about him in a few minutes, but this is our sixth podcast, I think. And this is somebody that's really very special to me, and I'm so excited to have him here. Let me tell you a little bit about Greenberg Traurig for you folks that don't know much about it. And Greenberg Traurig is and I grew up in Miami, and it started here with really was Bob Traurig, who I know, Bob unfortunately passed away, and it was a small firm at the time. So it's been you guys have almost 3,000 attorneys in 14 countries, I believe 47 locations, and it's over 55 years. And I've personally watched this firm grow. And, there's a big, Greenberg does everything, but, there's a focus, there's a huge cybersecurity focus, privacy, crisis management practice. And of course, they offer comprehensive services to safeguard data and to navigate complex regulatory environments. Of course, they do a lot more things, but since that's the focus today, we're going to talk about that. But the firm, of course, has global capabilities. If I remember correctly, I think there's like 14 languages or something spoken at the firm. And it's one of the largest law firms in the country. I think it's number 8 or 7, which is amazing. Most charitable law firms. Anyway, I'm giving a lot of accolades here, but the firm has really always been very special to me. So some of the global capabilities are the firm addresses cyber risk globally, and including compliance, data breach response, and regulatory defense. And, from a client service perspective, they assist in preparing for and responding to cyber incidents, including ransomware, data breaches, and regulatory investigations. And we get more into that, but I wanted to just I mentioned Bob Traurig, but somebody that I had a long time relationship with, and really the guy that I believe, really took the firm to the next level, Cesar Alvarez. And I believe Cesar started in 97. I got to know him in the years I was working for Alex Pinellas, and I watched this firm grow. I mean, it went from 325 to almost 2,000 attorneys, which was amazing. I mean, it was a small firm in Miami. And one of the things that happened over the years is that they enhanced their presence in cyber and data privacy. So, of course, I had a close relationship. I don't know how many times I called Cesar for checks when I was working in politics, and he was always so kind to give them to us, for contributions. And he's a great guy. And I believe he's still with the firm, right? He's in a different status now, right? But he was
senior chairman.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
And you mentioned 1997. He actually started the firm in 1973.
Oh no, 97. He became
CEO.
CEO, right? No,
Right.
Of course, right. That's good though. You remember that number. Rain Man. Okay, good. Well, it's okay. I remember numbers.
I remember a lot of numbers.
I know you do. Yeah. But now I will say, I'm going to be serious for a moment, because really, we like to joke, but Fred and I have known each other, and I'm going to get into that in a few moments, but since we were kids, and he is truly, I admire him tremendously. He does a lot of things, but over the years, because, he's really insurance regulatory guy, and he'll tell you a little bit more shortly, but I mean, for many years, he fell into the insurance business, and he really took it to the next level. Well respected in this community, well respected in the country. He's picked up an expertise in cybersecurity because it just kind of led that way. But he leads. So Fred leads the entire insurance regulatory and transaction practice for the firm, and he plays, of course, a significant role in the firm's cybersecurity and data privacy efforts because of all the clients, the insurance clients. So, I mean, he's been, like I said, he's well respected, well known, and really, has done a phenomenal job. As the insurance business and regulation has changed, he's looked at across the country as a guy that, a lot of folks come to him and learn from him. And he's been recognized as a top strategist in cybersecurity regulation, and he's one of the things that he's done so successfully. And I've heard this, through the grapevine, that he's guided companies through complex cyber law. And in many ways, he says he's not a pioneer, but I think in certain ways he is, because falling into cyber at a time when it really wasn't a thing, And, he's done a great job. And we're going to talk a little bit later, but, and he's a professor also at FSU College of Law. And I will tell you, I know you're very proud of that. And I've met a lot of his students and they also love him. They think he's a great teacher and he's also a great guy. But I just want to say a long introduction, but I'm so proud of you, Fred. I really am.
Well, thanks, Fred. I appreciate those kind words about the firm and about me. We certainly have known each other a long time. Any ride with you is an interesting ride. But I would also say, you mentioned something earlier that this is the sixth one of these. I'm just disappointed I wasn't number one. So we'll have to make up for it in quality here for sure.
Well,
and we will.
What? Listen, at the end of the day, man, I was actually, to tell you the truth, I wanted you on, but I was waiting. I really was. I wanted to get going. I'm serious. I wanted to get it going, get comfortable. But I'm going to talk for a moment, and my producer's going to kill me, so I want to move on. But I think this is really important because there's a real personal connection here. So Fred and I have known each other since Camp Coleman. How old were we? My God, yeah, we were kids. You're 4 years older than me, I believe. But so we grew up together. Now here's the story. We all went to summer camp together in Georgia our whole lives. Now my best friend is Fred's brother. Okay, let's get to that. So Lee. My best friend, Lee Karlinsky. And here's the kicker. So Lee and I, attached to the hip all these years. And one day Lee said, I'm going to date your sister. I'm like, what are you talking about, Lee? What? I was like, and so I laughed. I'm like, she'll never date him. Well, they have two amazing kids. They've been married for many, many years. So my best friend married my sister and we're all part of the family. So Fred's really family. And it's just such an honor to be here. And it's amazing how, these connections in life, we end up in situations where, things come together. And who would have thought my best friend would have married my sister and this amazing relationships would have happened. So on that note, why don't we get moving here? That was a long accolade. So again, Fred, it's great to see you, man.
Likewise. I'm not sure if we're on Thrive DX or the Jerry Springer show, but
well, it's sort of a combination. Fred Menachem, you never know what you're going to get, they used to say, right? You got to mix it up. But it's really good to see you, man. And I'm really proud of you. So why don't we just get moving? So what I want to talk about initially is I wanted you to talk about, look, I know you grew up in Miami, obviously, and raised here. And why don't you talk a little bit about your path, through school? You went to Florida State for law school, I believe, I guess I already know all those things. And talk about really, how you, because I know the story, but nobody else does, how that trajectory, I know the story. I know everybody, all the guys that came up with you on the insurance side. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
So happy to. So I went to the University of Miami undergrad, graduated with a degree in communications and sociology. I'm not sure there's much you can do with those degrees.
Right.
And so I had two options, according to my mom, who just passed away regrettably, but either go to med school, and I didn't like blood. I didn't like dealing with biology. I didn't understand any of that stuff, or go to law school. So I did. I went to Florida State Law, graduated up there in 1992, in December of 92, took the bar in February of 93, passed the bar and started working. While I was in law school, I was fortunate enough to get what was really a coveted position, and I enjoyed it, a internship with the Florida House of Representatives. That's still today. It's funny because one of the summer associates that worked for me this summer, second year 2L at FSU, he also applied for and got one of these spots. I think there were 500 or 600 people that applied, but very coveted. There's a number of reasons why that are beyond the scope of this discussion, but nonetheless, that really helped me understand how Tallahassee works. In understanding how Tallahassee works after Hurricane Andrew, I started to do insurance work, ultimately went into the Florida Residential Property and Casualty Joint Underwriting Association, which was created after Hurricane Andrew to deal with the market disruption. 13 companies went out of business after that. And so I worked there for several years. And then since then, I've worked in the insurance space representing companies all over first initially in Florida, but later the first concept of insurance, as you know, is spread your risk. And so I went into various states, and ultimately now I'm at GT for 10 years, and I chair the insurance practice here, as Fred mentioned, globally. And we deal with all 50 state regulators. We deal with a number of international regulators, and it's a lot of fun. No two states are the same in the regulatory world on insurance, especially. We say if you've seen one state, you've seen one state, and it's certainly true. And so every day is a unique day. Every day is a lot of fun. As Fred mentioned earlier, I've been an adjunct professor of law since 2008, so 16 years now at Florida State Law. I currently teach a class entitled Insurance Law and Regulation. It is taught during spring break. I am shocked that students want to give up their spring break. It's a 4-day course, 2
I'm
credits.
shocked as well, by the way, Fred. They
Yeah,
love you. I know. I was very surprised. They're like, I love Fred. I was like, really? Wow. But
yeah,
when I was at your house, remember? For the
yeah.
alumni
Fred
event.
came to a
Yeah.
function. A couple of my old students were there.
Yeah.
A couple of my old teaching assistants were there. But it really is a fun course. And so typically any year we'll have somewhere between a low of maybe 35, 40 students to a high of over 100 students. And it really is a cool class. We have guest speakers the whole time. So I do some of it, but I really rely on my friends to not only explain to people what it's like to be in the business of insurance, what it's like to understand insurance, but also to understand what it's like to work and to basically have responsibilities and to be, the best of breed in your particular profession. So now we've opened up the course to Juris Master students. We see a lot of people are in compliance in different companies, and it really is a fun thing to do. I will tell you that the class is obviously in May. It's spring break, or sorry, March during spring break. When COVID hit, we made the decision. The class starts on a Monday. Spring break starts, Friday, I guess, and people come back to school on Monday for the course. And people were supposed to come in person, but when COVID hit, it was right around that date
Right.
that we were starting in March. Remember, the world sort of shut down that Friday. It was a Friday before class started. We made the decision Thursday to go virtual, and I was the first class, sorry,
Right.
virtually at Florida State and for the College of Law, and it was just great. It was a good time, and we've done it virtually ever since, and it's actually enabled us to bring in more
Sure.
speakers from all around the country and all around the world.
That because we did the same thing, because we train in cybersecurity, and that changed the trajectory because we were also able to do that. By the way, since you were the first one, remember all that weird stuff was going on? Like people would come in. Do you have any real interruptions in your class?
No, we didn't have
No.
anything.
Right.
No.
Right. Because I think my nephews were doing stuff. Well, your nephews too, like that at the time. So on that note, I think this is a excellent thing to talk about. When you were obviously coming up in law, cyber wasn't a thing. You fell into it because of the reality. So I would think that it's going to become really, and it's already happening, where that's just the specialty, right? So, where somebody's just practicing cyber law, I imagine. So why don't you talk a little bit about, first of all, what's the role of a cyber, data privacy specialist, of what's the future going to hold for cyber law? Like, how's all that going to manifest itself? And also, I imagine now, are you teaching some of that when you're doing it? So I know it's a loaded question.
We teach it in the law course, and I've lectured on it in other quarters. And so what I would say to you is that there are different aspects of cyber law. Certainly there's prosecution and defense of liability. There's also whatever a governmental entity would do
Right.
as it relates to someone who's either been the victim of a breach for whatever reason. They might look at that company, or some other governmental entity might look at you from an enforcement perspective. In the world I live in, I've looked at cyber really from 2 different sides. Number one, the insurance companies are obviously targets. There is a
Right.
lot of data with insurance companies that insurance companies have personally identifiable information, PII. That's one of the most important type of data that you could make hay of in the.
What's the data? So I'm sorry, you
web.
said something using acronyms. So for folks that might not know what you're talking
Personally
about.
identifiable information. That's certain things, and there's PHI, which is personal health information. That's even more sort of rich data, if you will, on the dark web and for some of these threat actors out there. And so, in dealing with insurance companies, they have their own sort of pressure points, if you will, on data. And then, of course, it was the whole advent, if you will, of the insurance policies relating to cyber. Years ago, if there was an issue, and when I say years ago, I mean, look, the internet, the connected world is not that old. Data
Right.
privacy and cyber are 2 sort of similar issues. Data has been a bigger issue for a while than cyber because data's existed, whether it was on paper or otherwise. But in the cyber world, and again, I think they're inextricably tied. Cyber has not been that around that long, but since it has been around, there's always been an issue as it relates to what kind of policy would cover that. Initially, it was things like a business owner's policy or some other.
You're talking about the insurance policy,
correct?
Right? There wasn't a specific cyber policy yet. It was they were trying to figure out what the heck to do with it, right?
Initially, that's the case, but now almost invariably there are standalone cyber policies that a large or small or medium-sized business would buy to cover their cyber liabilities and other aspects of cyber downsides, if you will.
And that covers what? Like, for example, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes, but if it covers, I assume, if there's a ransomware attack, a hacking attack, right?
It can cover ransomware attacks. It can cover lost revenue. It could cover aspects of trying to get your system back up. It could cover a number of different things.
And I assume the premiums must be rising. I mean, look, I assume they have actuaries, obviously, but it's hard to be an actuary in an industry that's so new, right? Because you have to look at all the different hacking attacks, I guess, and just make it's not like auto insurance, right? How do they? I mean, I know you're not an actuary, but I would think, how do they? Yeah, it's going to keep going up, I guess. How do they figure all that out?
I'm not an actuary. Right. Don't tell anyone that because I get called all the time to help with those kind of things.
But you do notice little things on, like, you're very OCD, so you notice even a piece of lint on the floor, so you probably could be an actuary.
So I don't know if that makes you an actuary.
Well, no, but I mean, very detail-oriented.
Yeah, so anyhow, detail-oriented. And so,
right.
But I do understand the pricing and the pricing mechanisms. And your point is, if you don't have a lot of data, it's tough to price. So when cyber started, it was data. It was sort of rated, and the pricing was pretty reasonable. Then it went up as some attacks happened. Then as they leveled out off, sort of went down, and now we're seeing an uptick again because there's a rise in attacks. And one of the things you don't know about a cyber attack is what it's actually going to entail, and so that makes the pricing even more difficult.
I imagine, obviously with your clients, that I assume that your clients are insurance companies, but they also have to be insured. Are they self-insured? I mean, seriously.
No, most of the time they'll buy cyber insurance. So,
right. So
they say a lawyer who represents himself as a fool for a client.
Right.
Most of these insurance companies realize that it makes sense to, again, the concept I used earlier, spread your risk and go outside and have third parties write that coverage. I think it's rare. You may see some type of a retention, which is effectively a self-insurance, but that's for some portion of the liability, not the entire.
Sure. And look, I imagine you're in the middle of both negotiations on some level. I mean, it's not really your job, but I mean, certainly you have to advise them, right? What to pay, how to do it. So I guess you could be in the middle of two different clients, but that's not really get into that now, but it's got to be complicated. And I know that's not going off tangent, but what I did want to get into was, and all of this, and without getting into clients and all that, but earlier this year, as we all know, as United Health changed healthcare paid $22 million to unlock its systems. And it was a debilitating ransomware attack. We're seeing these obviously everywhere now. And, at the end of the day, everybody in general has to be aware that their data, their social security number is probably on the web now. I mean, on the dark web. That's the reality.
Well, there was just a report about that yesterday.
I read it.
The thing about social security numbers is they're less meaningful. Credit card numbers are less meaningful than they were 10 years ago. I mean, on the dark web, they go for almost nothing because you think about it, a social security number, a credit card number, those are easily changeable. The minute American Express or Visa or MasterCard sends you a note saying we've suspected suspicious activity, you say, yes, that was not me, or no, that wasn't me. And all of a sudden, they're cutting your card off. They're starting a new card for you, sending you a new card. Similarly with social security numbers, those have been out there so often that sort of doesn't matter at this point in time. So they have PINs and they have other things to help protect those. It's a nuisance, no question about it. I mean, I was hacked a few years ago by a real live cyber criminal.
You were personally hacked?
I've been hacked a number of times, just like
really. I'm hacking you right now, Fred.
But I had a cyber criminal that basically tried to steal my identity. Oh yeah, and they almost caught him in Georgia. The Georgia.
Really, I didn't know about that. I mean, you're a good guy to just steal our identity. I mean, they could get But you're
Well, one
serious.
thing I would say,
Yeah.
sort of not, part of this type of thought process that we're
No, it's
talking about,
okay.
but I would
Yeah.
say this. One piece of advice is that I give everyone: lock down your credit. There is no detriment. You don't need to deal with your credit every
To freeze
day.
it. You mean to freeze it, right? And then
Right.
when you
If you want to get a new credit card, you want to lease a car, get a mortgage or whatever, there's ways that credit will get opened back up. And so you don't need to fear about that. But I think
I think that's a good tip, by the
locking your
way.
credit. What?
That's a great tip, by the way, because
Yeah.
a lot of
Don't
people probably
smoke
don't
in
know
bed.
it.
That's
Why don't you give a little
Don't
more?
smoke in bed. That's another good one.
Well, but why don't you explain, like, for a moment, because I'm sure everybody doesn't know about freezing credit. Seriously, I mean,
you
you
just
can,
call the credit card
right?
companies, and they'll freeze it for some period of time. You may
Yeah.
have to come back to them later to make sure it continues, but it really does make a big difference.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, okay. So on that note, by the way, because I didn't know about you getting hacked, but you got to be careful. Obviously, opening you already know the story. But so I was talking about United Healthcare, and obviously they had the ability to get a ransomware attack. They're not the only insurance company. We know all that's going on. And also, they had to keep the hackers from publishing stolen information online. Now, uh, the tech target shared how cyber insurance liability premiums, I think, had increased 50%. So, what cyber insurance recommendations do you give, first of all?
Well, just make sure you go to a good broker that understands cyber. Make sure the policy covers what you need. Only need a certain type of policy for whatever business you are. It should be business specific, but really understanding what that policy does and what it doesn't. The other thing is a lot of the insurers will offer certain services in advance, maybe some type of penetration testing, maybe sort of advanced things as it relates to what to do in the event of a cyber breach, including but not limited PR types of things. And those types of things are really helpful to get, to get together before a breach happens.
And I'll tell you, we'll get to this later because I wanted to get to something now. But talking about PR, I watched the CrowdStrike thing, right? You watched how the CEO handled it. It's actually interesting what was going on there. You were talking about PR. We'll get to it later, but I don't know how close you were paying attention, how he took responsibility.
I was flying that day, so I was paying more attention.
Yeah, I'm sure I imagine you were paying attention, but I wasn't going to say that. But yeah, I'm sure that you were. But I don't give secrets away. So I just want the folks to know that are listening or watching, because some will be doing both. But ransomware accounts for a large percentage of cyber insurance claims, obviously. I think some are saying, and the data is like everything else, they're still trying to formulate it because it happens so often. But, some are saying it accounts for probably 75% of all claims. I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to guess that, because that's where the majority of the issues are. So this is where I'm getting at, man. And this, for me, like, I didn't even know this. And I know a lot about you. When we did our pre-interview, you told me something and it was like out of a movie. I think people would be really interested in this because really it was like a movie dealing with the FBI and all this. So I don't want to tell your story, but so obviously in the work that you do, you're dealing with things that happen. And there was a really large one, and we're not going to get into the names of who it was and all of that because it doesn't matter. But you had to, I think it was you, right? Maybe along with other folks, be in the middle of a negotiation with cyber criminals. And why don't you, well, first of all, just get into the story. Yeah, I know. Tell the story about that. It was like a spy novel, right?
A lot of my life has been like a spy novel, including but not limited to, and I can talk about this now because we didn't tell my mom being in the World Trade Center.
Well, so you didn't tell your mom about the World Trade Center. Actually, on a side note, now that you brought it up, why don't you tell everybody else about the World Trade Center?
I mean, I was there the September 11th, 2000. I was in building 2, the 51st floor. Building 2 was the one that got hit second, but the one that went down first. I was in the building when the first plane hit, looking out. I was in the stairwell running down when the second plane hit the building I was in. I was probably, well, the way I describe it is I was far enough where I didn't get any debris on me, but close enough where I felt I had to run when the building came down. And a client of mine who I just happened to be on the phone with, I had a BlackBerry at the time, as did everyone. And the reception was not good. You can imagine there was a lot going on in the area. A client of mine got through, and the minute and I was out, and the minute the building went down, my phone died. So he, of course, thought, and he was with a group, that I had perished in that. And so he called around, and I had to text back to people at the time. BlackBerries, you didn't have the same capabilities you do now. So I had to text people saying, hey, let Richie know we just got disconnected. I'm
Wow.
okay. But
Got it.
look, it was a crazy day, and I don't ever want anyone, especially not any American, to ever go through that again. So national security is important. And by the way, national security and cyber and terrorism
It's
all go hand in hand. I mean, a lot of what we're seeing here now, well, first of all, World War III or World War IV, wherever you want to call us,
not boots on the
in
ground anymore. It's
in
going
the
to be
cycle.
cyber.
Yeah, it's not boots
Course.
on the ground.
No.
It's going to be, maybe nuclear warfare, maybe chemical warfare.
Cyber impacts everything. That's what you were getting at, right? Everything. People say, oh, that is not important, but it certainly does, right?
I mean,
That's what you
in
were
the
getting at.
connected world, it affects everything. And like you said, the next war is not going to be a boots on the ground war. It's going to be nuclear. It's going to be chemical. It's going to be cyber. And we're fighting that war every day. The breaches that we see today, the incidents that we see, the threat actors, in large part are coming from foreign nation states. And so it's something we're going to have to be very
Yeah.
cognizant of, really, until the rest of our lives. I'm
Yeah.
sure we live in a connected world. And through that connectivity, there becomes a big threat potentially to us, because if someone gets into the system, they can affect a lot more than just social security and credit card numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it's look, and I know we go on a turn. I want to go back to this because we're getting off, but the truth is, and again, I've spent a lot of my life in those circles, and it is the scariest thing, and people don't understand it, and they need to be aware that they need to be aware, of the things that can happen, and it is scary, and we are in a dangerous time because warfare is different, and we have to keep our heads up, and we have to be aware because in a snap of the fingers, they already tried to poison a water system in Pennsylvania, and I think they were just testing, they can kill an entire, I can destroy an entire country. But anyway, this is so depressing. So let's get back. This is, but it's the truth. And so let's try to, I know here's something else could be depressing.
Well, it's a reality when we talk about
Yeah.
spy stuff, when we talk about threats. Those things are going on every day.
Yeah.
And it's a function of our data privacy. It's a function of our cyber. One thing I didn't say earlier, but I'll say now, a lot of the ransomware attacks that we're seeing, a lot of where that money's going to, it's going to threat actors on the
100
terrorist side. It's
100
not just people that are trying to make a couple bucks, or the 400-pound person in their parents' basement. These are nation states who want to hurt our country, who want to hurt businesses.
The economy, right?
Yeah, I mean, in a large part emanates, and I'm not saying anything that's inappropriate or making a valid judgment, but a lot of it emanates out of Russia and China. And
I mean, that's the reality because they're adversaries. I mean, it's not a negative. There's nothing wrong with it. That's the facts because there's adversarial relationship. China's economic. So go ahead. But yeah, I mean, it's the reality.
Well, that's exactly right. So we dealt with several ransomware attacks in the last couple of years. They were very interesting.
Big insurance company, freaking similar to what I was talking about without naming the insurance company. They hack all their data. It was a significant amount of data, right?
Yes. It was hundreds of thousands of policyholders, probably 500,000 policyholders.
And so when that happens, a ransomware attack, they lost everything. And it was, and what happens is, right, you get a phone call, probably nation state, right? And they're like, well, if you want the data back, you're going to pay us. By the way, was it sophisticated? Like, how did they reach out?
It was sophisticated. I mean, they would email us. They would show us what they had. Ultimately, once we paid the ransomware with the acknowledgement and acquiescence of the FBI and the other law enforcement agencies that look at these things, they gave us the data back. We've never heard from them since. There is honor among these thieves, as crazy as that'll sound. The one reason I think cyber dipped for a while is because then when there was some question about crypto and Bitcoin, you don't pay these people with a credit card. You don't pay these people in cash. You pay them with crypto or Bitcoin or something like that. And so I think when that all sort of crashed, for lack of a better term, you saw a dip in these, because how do you pay ransomware? But they slowly figured it out. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll always figure it out. I mean, I always said, and I say this joking, anybody listening, I always said I'm in the wrong business, right? We need to be criminal hackers. And then, we could make a living. I'm talking about like hacking Iran, hacking the enemies. Let's clean out, the Iranians, all the North Korean hackers, and we could be Robin Hood, man.
I'm sure it's happening.
Right?
some point.
No, I know, but we could be like Robin Hood, man. We like get the money and then we give it out, right? In this country, people are starving. I mean, I actually think it's a great idea. That's a way, instead of raising taxes.
Well, I don't think it's a great idea.
Well, no,
Not
it's
you,
no,
but it is interesting how these people take their knowledge and their capabilities and use it for good, bad versus good. To me, it's sort of crazy. But anyway, we knew it was a nation state. They
Yeah.
were emailing us in the middle of the night, broken English. Interestingly enough, they said, if you have any problems dealing with us, we've got a customer service number. Feel free.
You swear?
Anytime. Oh, yeah. No, and they were always very polite in their emails. Ultimately, it was an insurance company, as we talked about. A couple of years ago, the companies weren't doing so well. So we showed
Right.
them, look, we're losing money, because they looked at the top line. And they agreed, and I think they had some sympathy towards us. We paid less than they had asked. We did
Wow.
negotiate
Right.
that. And like I said, ultimately, once we gave them the data and they went away, they never came back. So, look, it's not for the faint of heart. You need to make sure you're dealing with things the right way with the Office of Financial or Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, and
The FBI was involved, right? So our
Yes,
office
yes.
part was right.
In order to pay ransomware, you need sign off from those folks, because even if they know you're going, I guess, to a terrorist, they want to understand the
Yeah,
flow
of
of the money.
course.
Number one, see if they can get it back. And number two, see if there's a way to
Track.
somehow infiltrate these organizations too.
It's craziness. And I will say, and I want to move on to the next topic, but it's a bittersweet, not bittersweet situation. It's great that you got the data back, but every time somebody pays a ransomware attack, right? It gives, they're going to keep doing it. The question is, how do you stop the bleeding so that they aren't able to do it anymore? I don't know the answer, and I'm sure you don't either. But
There's no foolproof system. I wish there was.
yeah,
But in the cyber world, we say two things. Number one, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
yeah,
I believe that when I've talked to law enforcement agencies, departments of insurance, attorney generals on cyber,
yeah.
where we've had folks that have had incidents that need to be reported, I've said this to all of them. I said, look, this is one instance where the headline's going to be us today. It could easily be you tomorrow. And so you may just
Yeah.
want to consider how you're going to deal with folks. But that's the reality of where we live.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And I guess this is just one of the things that they were doing is that for a while, and if you remember this, they decided, well, it's really, you're hacking like the US. You got a lot of eyes on you. So they went a little while. Do you remember this? They were hacking Costa Rica, small governments where they were getting less money, but it was also a lot easier. And they weren't going to have the weight of the United States behind them.
Yeah.
And that went on for a while. But, it's just craziness. And it's unfortunate. And I guess the only thing is to keep your, obviously the compliance and all of that, and you do the best you can, but you're going to be hacked.
If you fail to prepare to fail.
Right. And the thing is, it's how quickly you stop the bleeding, as we know.
Well, the right time to deal with cleaning up your house is not when it's on fire.
Right. Of course.
Well,
maybe
look at voting. I mean, we went from electronic to paper.
Yeah.
And go back to paper and electronic and verify. So there's something to be said with having a quote unquote paper trail.
Of course.
Now you can have an electronic paper trail.
Yeah, but there is. So okay. So I want to move, and I never can get through, Fred, all the things I want to do. So, but CrowdStrike, let's talk. So could the CrowdStrike outage cause, cyber insurance premium hikes? I think I know the answer, but what do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. I think any incident, any big incident, it's just like we're talking about a number of storms in South Florida this year, this hurricane season. You have a lot of incidents. People are going to try to come back in, but they're going to try to price it in a way that they're not going to go upside down if there's a deal. So yeah, they may not be able to lever themselves 100%, but they're going to try to go as hard as they can and as close as they can.
It's like United, who is it? Yeah. Who was in the state for a while and they pulled out, Citizens, who was it? The hurricane stuff. God, I can't think of the name. Citizens, who was it?
Citizens is still our largest insurer in the state.
Oh, they're still in the state? Okay, who pulled out? I thought somebody pulled out, the old company.
A couple different carriers have. A couple of them have scaled back. A couple are writing more. So
it's hard. It's not easy. After Hurricane Andrew, you mentioned Hurricane Andrew, and a lot of folks don't even know, so long ago it was one of the worst disasters. It's in the area that Fred and I grew up in, 1992.
It's crazy.
Yeah. My dad had just died, I remember, right in July. Unfortunately, he was 50, and we said, in some ways, grateful that it happened before that. And, you were talking about that as it related to all the insurance stuff. that was a disaster. It was a smaller area, but what did it take, a year? I mean, there was so much fraud
more than
before
that. It
cyber.
took
I mean, there was
several years.
National Guard. It was, it was literally destruction and looting. And you kind of brought that up earlier, but it might not have been a cyber disaster, but that in fact, similar to what I'm saying, the premiums, right? That was like, I mean, that's the same. It might not be a cyber, but there was fraud, right? And all of that. I mean,
There's always fraud in a situation like that.
yeah. I mean, they were giving out money. Remember, independent contractors, they were just handing people checks. It was crazy. But so you were saying basically, as far as the cyber insurance premium hikes, how are they going to figure it out? Again,
Well, you don't have a big body of data, and so it's tougher to price it. So in a lot of ways, you're pricing off of whatever the last thing you saw was. So if there's a bad year for cyber, it'll probably get priced higher. If there's a good year, it may go down. It's not a mature enough coverage, in my opinion, to really have credible data. Plus, the difference is in South Florida, for example, there's going to be a hurricane. That there's
right.
going to be flooding in California. For cyber incident, it's sort of like all or nothing, right? You're either going to get hit or you're not. And
but you're probably going to get hit. I mean, in one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, the cyber world, we say there's two kinds of people out there. There are those who've been hacked and know it. And then there are those that have been hacked and just don't know it yet.
Right. Sure. Of course. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, even malware in their phone and all of that. And
human error. I mean, human error is the biggest reason why.
That's the biggest one. That's why we do training. I mean, that's right. Your firm, I imagine, has to train, right? They make sure people don't click on links. They probably do the tests. You send somebody and really the phishing attacks, it's getting better and better. I mean, literally.
Phishing for those that aren't familiar with the PHISH, not phishing.
That's a whole nother animal. I mean, we're going to see. I mean, it's going to get to the point where it's exorbitant, like hurricane insurance, and you're going to have companies not being able to afford it. And I don't know what's going to happen then. People, I mean, really, right? People are going to stop doing it because I don't know how you mitigate that risk.
Look, I agree with you, and I think we're going to have some conclusion and some plan moving forward at some point in time.
Government will have to subsidize some of it.
Just like they do with the NFIP and just like they do with PREA. They say they don't, but if rates are too low, I think they do.
But of course, they don't want to say it, but they have to. So let's move to something else that I think, obviously, we're all talking about this, right? And I play with AI all the time. I mean, I'm literally, this is embarrassing, but I have conversations with it about everything. It knows my name. Obviously, it's not a person, but AI can be amazing, right? And it could be dangerous, but it's amazing how quickly I think, Fred, that this is the biggest thing since obviously the telephone, right? Electricity, the telephone, and the world is going to change in the next 10 years more than it's changed in the last 50. And so how do you see, I mean, I'm sure AI is starting to impact the industry, right? Is it helping the insurance sector? Is it hurting? How's it evolving? All that stuff.
Well, I think the first thing is there aren't any real concrete rules on the use of AI. So departments, legislators in various states, legislatures are trying to come up with solutions there. But it's going to not be a one-size-fits-all approach, and that will continue to make life interesting is the best word I could use, because people are still going to need to understand how it all works. But yeah, it's clear that there's going to be, that moving forward.
I mean, listen, and right, exactly. None of us know where it's going to lead. I mean, that's the reality, right? There's going to be dangerous situations that come of it, and there's going to be good that comes of it. But I mean, right? I mean, nobody knows. You can't even answer.
No one knows.
Right? I mean, literally, I told you, I use ChatGPT a lot. I ask it, I like to talk and everybody wants to listen to me, Fred, right? I talk a lot where sometimes you can't deal with it. You put the phone to your ear. So it's true, but I like to learn.
Put the phone down, not to your ear.
Right. No, you're like, okay, you're dying laughing in a way, and then you're running. But that, all joking aside, so AI is crazy because I spent an hour yesterday, and it has to do with you and our family. I'll talk to that offline, asking it to do something for me. And I eventually got it to agree, I'm not kidding, to do a report on something, an assessment, psychological. And it said it's going to take 1 to 2 weeks. And I kept asking it, how is that possible? I said, my friends say it's not. It says no. I mean, it's telling me it's going to happen. So I go to another friend. He's like, who are you? How do you do this? He's like, only Fred Menachem. He's like, he kept asking if it would do it for him. He's like, no, ChatGPT said it doesn't do that. He's like, what did you do? You open something. And I say that because you don't know, obviously you're feeding it ethical constraints and all that, but you don't really know it. I mean, it's not a person, but can maneuver off. I don't mean maneuver off in the sense of like building itself, but it can maneuver off because maybe you don't put the right restraint or something, and somebody
Well,
comes
there's
in.
other systems that play. I mean, garbage in, garbage out.
Right. But I wonder why it's doing this report for me. And I can't wait to see if it really does it. And you'll just wait for the psychological assessment of the Menachems and the Karlinskys. That's another. I'm not even kidding. Okay. So let's move to the, let's talk a little bit about what's going on, with the SEC, and it's going back and forth. So we saw the case was at SolarWinds where initially they tried to charge the CISO, right? And they had all these charges, but really, and part of it is because the government doesn't really know what to do. Let's be realistic. And so everybody wants to point the blame somewhere else. Makes sense.
Well, that's what happens in a situation. You always want someone to blame. But at the end of the day, like I said earlier, you're in a situation now where it could be, this insurer one day, this bank the next day, and then the government the other day. So it's just not a good situation for anyone. I think this is a definition of being in something together, and we need to work it through versus trying to overregulate people.
But I understand it, and I agree, but how do you work? I mean, listen, we're not going to solve it today, but and this is more rhetorical, but I mean, how do you do it? Nobody knows, right? I mean, there's no way to know, and I think at the end of the day, the government, the companies are going to have to come together. You can't force feed something.
Education, mitigation, those types of things on both sides of the aisle. Education for the governmental apparatuses, when there's a problem, identify and explain what you've done to fix it. And, for the insurance, I think there needs to be some education.
Yeah, and of course, and you were talking about training, and you were talking about compliance. And, I asked you, I think in our pre-interview, what the importance of maintaining a culture of compliance with evolving standards. And the thing is, though, elaborate on what does that entail for companies? Because who knows what the evolving standards are? They change, right?
Well, you have to keep up with those changes. You have to make sure that you're on the cutting edge of anything that happens in that regard.
Sure. And what common pitfalls are orgs, especially insurance companies, but I mean, I'm sure it's just overarching when they're developing their cybersecurity policies. I mean, what's the most difficult thing? I mean, lack of response, I'm guessing.
Well, lack of response,
precautionary
action, and just the turnover in those types of departments where if you don't have the right people there, you could definitely have a big problem.
I guess looking ahead, and I don't know, but what trends, what do you think is going to dominate the industry? I mean, data privacy and
well, I think the
data privacy. What do you do? Yeah,
I think data privacy, like I said, goes hand in hand with cyber. But I think the breaches are going to continue. I think the insurance industry will perform. I think it'll be interesting to see how the courts ultimately play some of these things out, because that will dictate pricing and liability moving forward.
Yeah, and so I think we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I mean, again, I don't have to give a magic answer, but how should companies prepare? You have a company, you're Fred Karlinsky, right? You're going because you do a lot of education. I mean, whether it's official or you just talk to a lot of people, right? You're teaching. People must ask you, what should they do to prepare and for future challenges.
I think I've told you, if you fail to prepare to fail. And so just making sure, again, whether it's with your insurance company or some other third party who's been there, who's done that, like our firm, for example, just make sure every aspect of what you think is going to happen, you've got some contingency for. If it's one you can't do, you need to acknowledge that to everyone. But if it's ones you can do, number one, you should. And number two, under most laws, you're duty bound to do that.
At the end of the day, preparing for this, at the end of the day, there's no real advice you can give except be on top of it.
I remember, just be prepared.
I remember my point now, by the way. Training. You've said this many times. It's human error, right? Usually. So as far as Greenberg, for example, without giving away your secrets, but seriously, you train all the employees probably, right? There's a higher level training for the folks in that world. I mean, it's got to be, but I'm sure you guys do a lot, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we do that all the time, and it's because the human element here is probably one of the most significant vulnerabilities that any system in any company has.
And there's got to be like guardrails. So we talked about a lot of things, but training. So training is probably one of the most important things, right? And that's what a lot of companies aren't doing, I think. Right?
Well, training is important. Making sure, again, people understand the system, the vulnerabilities, what kind of data you have, getting
Sure.
up with PR professionals in the event that there's a breach. I mean, just think about it. If you have a home, you don't want to start putting in a fire hydrant while the home is on fire.
Right. No, exactly. Very good analogy. No, but it's true. I mean, it sounds so simple, but I think for whatever reason, and okay, we're getting to time, but I ask kids sometimes. I'm not kidding. I walk around. I've learned a lot, right? I've been in cyber now 6 years. As you know, I always do a lot of things, but they always they're all connected, right? So cyber, it's all connected, the stuff I've done. But I do this. I always say to people, because I'm like, hey, and I tell you something, the younger generation, I see it with your kids, with my nephews, they are so fast to put data up. They don't even think about security because they
My
live.
daughter's the one that got me into this system because I couldn't figure it out.
Right. But the thing is, I'm saying I know I was there when Allie did that, but they don't think, they're so used to putting data in. They don't think about, hey, I'm on a public Wi-Fi. I literally ask. So I do this exercise sometimes because I want people to learn. It's my way of teaching. I'll go into a public place and I'm not doing it in the middle attack. What I'll do is I'll copy the exact, right? I'll copy the exact, SSID, and I'll make the password the same, and I'll sit there. And people are like, oh, I'll walk around first. Do you use a VPN? No. And I'm not doing it so sophisticated. I'll sit there and I watch all these freaking phones getting onto my phone. And I show it to them. And I'm like, guys, do you realize that how easily, if I had the equipment, that I could get all of your data? And they're like shocked. I'm like, you're not on the internet here. You're on my phone.
That's crazy.
And so, yeah, but it's easy. We'll do it one day.
No,
but,
I agree.
Right?
I
No,
understand.
but by the
I've
way,
seen it before.
Freddie, that's a great teaching thing. I always that was my thing. It is a great example to teach people because they don't, if once that happens, they're like, oh my God. And then they might take it more seriously.
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, right. So on that note, I could talk to you all day, obviously, about all of these things. And this has been great. And we'll do it again. But
yeah, we need to do it again. Sure.
Of course we will. But look, I think that this topic, insurance, I think people are very interested in this. And I think that this was really the first time that we've really gotten into this subject. And so I want to do this again. And I think we'll have some other folks and we'll do this again. But I think people learned so much today. I certainly did. But what would you like, I don't know. Okay, you have a minute, whatever it is, to just leave something, some advice, anything, even whatever you want to say, man. What do you leave to the world?
Well, I think in this context, good cyber hygiene is important. And again, it's not a question if, it's a question of when. If you fail to prepare to fail. There are two kinds of people in the world. There are those that have been hacked and know it, and then there are those that have been hacked and just don't know yet. And on the earlier discussion we had on the 9/11 discussion, I guess what I've told people after is, I was below the building and you had to sort of do something strange below the building to not make it out. Similarly, if you were above, you probably had to do something really strange to get out. So my advice to people in an overall fashion is, if you're in a bad situation, get out quick.
Yep. And you're right. And by the way, and we'll end it on that, but really briefly, I imagine that, and I know, that first of all, that made you respect life more, but also I imagine that it created a lot of anxiety, right? certainly being in that situation.
Well, look, you're more cognizant when you're in a tall building. And I was in Chicago last week for an NAIC meeting.
Yeah.
We were in the convention center area. They were prepping for the DNC this week, and I saw a bunch of helicopters flying around.
Yeah.
They were flying close to our buildings, full windows.
Of course it did. A little PTSD. You just don't like to admit it, but
right.
It does. No, but it does, man. Any situation like that, that is like, that's a serious situation.
No, for sure.
And I'm glad you're alive, by the way. And I am. Too. And I want to tell you, listen, again, thank you for doing this, man. I am so proud of you. Really, we joke around and we've known each other a long time and say stupid things, just kidding around. But all joking aside, man, what you've done, first of all, you're a good person. You're charitable. I know people talk so highly of you, and what you've done, man, your career and what you've contributed, in your career and teaching, giving it back. I respect it, man. I admire you a lot. I love you a lot, brother. And thanks so much for doing this. And I can't wait for the final product, man. But again, great work. Thanks to Greenberg Traurig for having you come over here. And on that note, thanks again, Freddie. And for everybody else, we'll look forward to seeing you again for our next podcast. You can come to all of our different avenues. You can come to our Thrive DX on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. and listen to the podcast on, you can watch it on YouTube, as I said, and also it's on Spotify, it's on Amazon, it's on Apple and iHeart to listen to. So thanks again, Freddie. Great to see you, my brother. And we'll do this again. This was a great I had a great time today, man.
All right, thanks. I did too, Fred. Thanks for having me.
Today's podcast is brought to you by ThriveDX, the global leader in cybersecurity training. Now, are you interested in learning more about becoming a cybersecurity professional or how to better secure the future of your organization? Visit thrivedx.com for more details and make sure you follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter, for updates, info, and more. And before we go, I want to thank everyone who helped make this possible. My dynamic executive producer, Michael Seth Prell. Our producer and publicist, Carrie Ann Hilton. The design and original music was done by Gilly Fox, Ksenia Aron, and Moro Khanna. Our editors, Modi Nachum and Amit Zach. Our advisor, Yoni Neiman, and our manager, Leora Zeri. And the entire operation was overseen by Eugenio Robino Writer at ThriveDX. Thanks to this incredible team. Thanks everyone for joining us. This is Fred Menachem, 0 to 60 and nothing in between. We'll see you in the next episode.